Good morning and welcome to Mapistry's webinar on data tracking and analytics. Today we will be discussing some common struggles industrial facilities face when tracking their regulatory data. We will demonstrate how Mapistry's innovative technology is helping to alleviate these challenges and create a better system for collecting, organizing, and analyzing accurate data for facilities on a day-to-day basis. So some introductions here. My name is Amber Smith. I previously ran our environmental services department for 2 years before I moved into my current role as product manager to help provide technical expertise to our development team, excuse me, on a full-time basis. I'm excited to have my 2 teammates and 2 of Mapistry's most experienced subject matter experts presenting with me today. First, we have Julia Balu. Her background is in civil engineering, and she has worked closely with Mapistry's customers, deciphering permits and determining requirements for about 2.5 years now. Now, in her new role as Manager of Solutions Engineering, she is helping apply that background knowledge to building the software and hoping to solve additional pain points in traditional compliance activities. We also have Courtney Wilson. She is our Director of Compliance Solutions. She is a licensed civil engineer. She came from a traditional consulting background with a focus on compliance program management, and she has now been with us for 1.5 years. I am now going to pass it over to Courtney to explain what solutions engineering is at Mapistry and dive into how industrial facilities are currently tracking their regulatory data and some potential struggles that they might be facing. Courtney?
Thank you, Amber, for that introduction. Yes, I'm Courtney Wilson. I'm Director of Compliance Solutions over here at Mapistry. And you may be wondering what we're talking about when we say solutions at Mapistry. The solutions team is part of the larger in-house customer experience team, and we're a team of subject matter experts in environmental permits. Our role is to work with facilities at the setup of the projects and make sure that they are being set up so that you are getting the information you need collected in Mapistry so that you can meet your reporting requirements. We're going to work with you through your life as a customer and check in with you regularly, see if anything's changed, and make sure the software is meeting your needs. I joined Mapistry in 2019 because I wanted to help environmental program managers simplify their programs. I felt that reporting could be made overly complex by a lack of good tools. One story that comes to mind is when I was working as a consultant, we had a client who kind of at the last moment realized they needed to report on the amount of waste that had been collected by their street sweepers over the year. So they dropped off stacks and stacks of paper logs from their street sweepers and asked us to total everything up so that they could have the information they needed for the permit. This seemed like a poor use of time and resources, and we really felt like we could only assume that we were getting the information correct and that they'd actually collected all the logs over the year. So I'm happy to be a part of Mapistry where we're able to give you control back over your environmental programs. And with control comes confidence. We want you to be confident that you are in compliance with your permit, to know that you're not missing any requirements, that you're using your resources wisely, and that you're able to take a proactive approach to compliance and get real-time accountability at the facility level. So we're going to be taking a pretty deep dive into these new data management tools that I'm really excited for Amber and Julia to share with you. But to kind of set the stage, we're going to start by talking about what has worked or isn't working currently. In the past, paper worked. It worked well. I'll be honest. I kind of miss doing paper inspections. How many of you are still doing some of your inspections on paper? Oh, okay. I can't see your hands, but I'm sure some of you are raising your hands. Paper worked well. You would do your inspection. If there was a problem at the site, you could call or send an email depending on the severity of it. You could stick it in a binder. Maybe at the end of the year, somebody would come by, read those reports or count them to make sure all of them were done. And this worked largely because the rules were simpler and there was less oversight. When you bring that paper into today's world, you start to feel frustrated and out of control. You go to look at those paper records and you realize they're missing information or they're incomplete, and the person who filled it out is no longer with your company. You have to take those paper records and send them to an in-house expert or an outside consultant to compile all the information while you're sitting back and waiting to know if you're in compliance with your permits. You get that information back in time for the report, which is great, but really when it's too late to take any action on that information. And there's a lot to keep track of. I'm sure many of you are responsible for more than one environmental program out there. So in today's world, we know that there's just a demand for more information and to have that information accessible when you need it. And that's why paper's just not cutting it anymore. There's more complexity in the regulations and things seem to change, every year, if not mid-year. And there's sharper consequences when your reports are inadequate and your information is missing. And we know with those sharper consequences, you can end up as a headline for non-compliance. I hope this doesn't happen to anybody on our call today. And I know with some of the clients that I've been involved with trying to address these non-compliance issues in the past, the typical course of action was to deploy a team of consultants to all the facilities to get that understanding of what is actually going on at the facility. So this tells me that the core of the problem was a lack of understanding at the facility level of what the requirements are, a miscommunication between the site level and the corporate level, or the correct questions weren't being asked of the facilities from the beginning. Besides headlines, you're going to be facing steep penalties, and those penalties are just the beginning of the true cost of non-compliance. You're going to be involving additional time and resources to bring your facilities back into compliance, and hopefully also taking a proactive approach to make sure those same problems aren't happening somewhere else. The non-compliance can cause disruptions at your company, as well as this year we saw one of the most significant disruptions of our lifetime. We were displaced from our offices and disconnected from our teams. And we saw that there was a real need to have a centralized system for environmental data management. We hope that these don't happen again, but you can be prepared. We hope that a disruption this significant doesn't happen again, but you can certainly be prepared for the next disruption. At Mapistry, we minimize disruptions with our 3 focuses of capture, control, and analyze. We create systems that are easy to use by field staff. We give you the ability to control what information is being collected, how often it's being collected, and then you get the 24/7 insights into how each facility is performing. Simplicity is something that's often overlooked by other EHS companies. And our founders started Mapistry because they wanted to bring simplicity to environmental software. Without simplicity, you're back at square one and you're disconnected and you don't have the information you need. With the tools that we're going to be talking about today, our data management tools, we set out to solve 3 problems we were hearing from clients. And the first one is that they wanted easier to follow calculations, that they felt confused or again frustrated by their spreadsheets, and then they didn't know if they were working. Julia, weren't you just helping somebody with this the other day?
Yep, we've definitely worked with customers, bringing them, transferring their logs into Mapistry, where I've spent a lot of time coming through spreadsheets and trying to trace back formulas and all of that. And in more than one instance, found cases where maybe new logs were added, new rows were added, and those just weren't being factored into the formulas correctly, or maybe things logged in different units were just being added together, because you can add any number together in a spreadsheet without it, notifying you that your units are not compatible yet. So little things like that can definitely make a big difference in your final calculations, and it's hard to visualize when you're just working in a spreadsheet, unless you're the spreadsheet expert. But then when it's time to transfer that information to someone else, that can be even more complicated. So yeah.
It's a challenge we see often, that the spreadsheets were set up for last year's data, and this year's data doesn't fit into them the same way. So your formulas don't work anymore, or maybe the person who set up the spreadsheet isn't involved in the project anymore, and you just don't know how to make sense of it. So we're really excited with the calculation tools in our logs to make calculations simpler and more transparent for you. The other problem we kept hearing was that people wanted to be able to spot trends before they become problems. We know things at your site can change daily, monthly, or quarterly, and you can, with the tools that Julie and Amber are going to demonstrate, you can have that visibility into how things are changing at your site on a regular basis, and that gives you time to adjust practices. So if you see something changing and now you need to revisit your permit conditions or call your regulator and make sure you're still in compliance, you have time to do that. And if you are going to experience an exceedance, you can see that coming and be prepared for that. My cat joined us. And finally, we want to avoid end of reporting period surprises. Having that same visibility into your program on a day-to-day basis will let you know if your generator status has changed, if you're going to have any TRI exceedances, and be able to be proactive and prepared for any additional reporting requirements that are going to come because of these changes. So, thank you. With that, I'm going to pass it back over to Amber for a quick poll.
Thank you for that wonderful summary, Courtney. So we're going to run a quick poll just to see what type of reporting requirements you guys are facing out there. Loading here. Uh-oh. Sorry, technical difficulties here. I accidentally clicked it too many times. So with that, we will carry on. My apologies for that. We're going to go ahead and dive right into our use cases, as I cannot seem to launch the poll again. We did have a couple people report, but it was too fast. I closed it out by accident. So I can share the few results that we have. These are some of the use cases that we'll actually be going over. Hazardous waste tracking, TRI reporting, safety incident reporting, total oil capacity tracking, and then meter reading tracking. So maybe if you guys could just throw in the questions, which one of these you have to report to, that'd be really great. We would really appreciate it, just to kind of understand the different struggles that you're dealing with there. And again, I apologize. I had some technical glitches there and closed that out a little bit too fast. So with that, we'll go ahead and dive into our use cases. Some of these use cases are basically examples of how facilities are dealing with these different reporting requirements, and how we're taking it and using it in Mapistry and allowing people to track this information, log their data, and then turn that data into metrics and be able to set KPIs and goals and things that they want to accomplish through their environmental reporting, and be able to see that in real time. So I will pass it over to Julia, and she will dive into some of our use cases.
Yep, thanks, Amber. And yeah, it looks like we'll cover, you know, some stuff that at least one of you has to track at your site. So that's great. Not letting me. Switch to the. Great. So in a minute, Amber's going to walk us through how this example could be tracked in Mapistry, but first we're just going to introduce the topic a little bit and give some background. So this first one is about hazardous waste generator status, where we might be tracking or logging how much hazardous waste our facility is generating every month, which determines what generator class we might fall under. And this is important because the requirements that accompany each class can vary, and we want to make sure that we're meeting the requirements that apply to us at any given time. So the basic hazardous waste management standards for generators are established by the Resource Conservation and Recovery Act, or RCRA, and those can be found in the Code of Federal Regulations 40 CFR Part 262. The amount of hazardous waste generated per month determines how a generator is categorized, and as we said earlier, that also determines what associated requirements apply. So the classes of hazardous waste generator, as you can see in this table, are very small quantity generators who in general produce less than or equal to 100 kilograms of hazardous waste per month. Then to the right, there are small quantity generators who produce between 100 and 1,000 kilograms of hazardous waste per month. And then there are finally large quantity generators who produce 1,000 kilograms or more of hazardous waste per month. And they are the ones who typically have the most stringent set of requirements to meet. So depending on your generator class, the additional requirements that apply, for example, on a federal level could be that large quantity generators are required to complete biennial reports, which provide data on waste that was shipped off-site during the previous calendar year. But biennial reports are not required by small or very small quantity generators. And another example is large quantity generators are required to conduct a full training for personnel that covers hazardous waste management and emergency procedures, while there's just a more basic training requirement for small quantity generators, and there's no federal requirement specific to personnel training for very small quantity generators. So now Amber's going to show us how we might track that in Mapistry and see what generator status we fall under so that we know which requirements we have to meet.
Great, thank you. So we'll go ahead and dive into the demonstration. So this is Mapistry's dashboard, and as Julia was mentioning, one of the main things that people care about with hazardous waste generation is their status. So we have a status tracker here, and essentially when you sign up, when a facility signs up with Mapistry, what's going to happen is our CX team will go in and they will set up, they'll take your spreadsheet like Julia was saying, and then they'll go ahead and set up all of the requirements and take all of your logged items and all of your other calculations and transfer that information into Mapistry. So what we're seeing here is our logged items tab. So in this case, we have 5 items that we're tracking for our hazardous waste generation. We have our frequency, which is weekly, and we have our units, which some are in drums and some are in gallons. We have the ability to create separate groups here. So I know that antifreeze is not a very hazardous waste, but I'm just going to throw it in here for demonstration purposes. We're going to save those settings. And then I'll show you when we go to add a log, how you can actually break this up and kind of organize your log. We also have factors. In this example, we basically want to transfer or convert gallons into pounds, because ultimately we need to track everything in weight to determine our status. So we have our different densities here. We have our calculated values, and as Julia and Courtney were kind of mentioning earlier, we have a very simplified version of calculations. That way it's really easy to follow. If you have any turnover, someone can come into here and quickly and easily see like exactly where all of your calculations are coming from, as opposed to cell C4 and so on and so forth and having to go through the spreadsheet. We have our different log items and factors that are available within the dropdown. And then we also have our limits tab. So for what we care about here, we care about very small quantity generators, which Julia mentioned was under 100 kilograms. So we have a minimum, and we're tracking it on a monthly basis because that's what status is tracked on. And then we also have our large quantity generator, which is going to be over. So we have this max 1,000 kilograms per month. Really cool feature here too, and this is on every single tab, is you have this notes section. So within the notes section, you can put in sources, maybe a permit. You have a link to, like an internal link to the permits and where those are located so that you can quickly see where this limit is sourcing from. There's no guessing. And again, if there's turnover, you don't have to dig through and figure it out. What I have put in here is basically just the EPA website for this hazardous waste generation, the categorization of that. We also have rolling calculations. So within the rolling calculations here, we have the percentage of each one. That's for like the total waste. And then any unit conversions that you might want to see in your final log. So that's the setup. Again, our customer experience team can set you up, or you can set yourself up, depending on your needs and depending on how much support you would like. So coming back to the dashboard here, I'm going to show when you go to add a log. As I mentioned in the setup, we now have 2 groups here. So depending on what you're tracking, and you'll see a little later, you might want to group things a bit differently. You add in your different logs here on your set frequency. So for this, we have weekly, and you can see in the calendar widget itself that each week this is green. That means that whatever has been filtered here, and you can have one or you can have multiple things filtered here. And that just means that each one of those items which has been filtered has been logged. So this also links to an email system, the notifications, so that you'll know when it's yellow like this, it's upcoming. If somehow it turns red, that means that you've missed one of these logs, and you'll get an email notification that goes along with that. So it'll say, hey, you got a log upcoming, or you've missed something, and then that way everybody on your team that's in Mapistry will know what's going on in real time. You can also duplicate this widget here, which is pretty cool, and you can filter it by different things. So maybe I just want to have my used oil filters in this guy. And then you can track them all separately. So we also have, beyond the calendar widget, we also have our charting widgets. And then within the charting widget, you're going to have your limit, which is the red line. And then you have the frequency at which you care about. So this one we care about monthly. And it looks like for large quantity generator status, we were doing really good, and we were actually very close to small quantity, or very small quantity generator status for January and March thus far. But February, if we hover here, it looks like we actually did exceed. So when you guys are out in the field, do you see this type of thing where it's actually, you might get a spike and status might change from month to month?
Amber, yeah, I've seen this happen. I've seen it happen when facilities, they may embark in some sort of construction or temporary project that has additional materials coming through the site, as well as maybe seasonal operation changes, as well as if they had a spill or a leak cleanup. So it is common to hear status change over time.
Got it. Yeah. So it's really important to kind of have this real-time knowledge. We also have this limit tracker down here. So this will be on a month-to-month basis as you're tracking it. You can see that, for March thus far, at least, we have a long way to go to get to large quantity generator. But we have already gone past the very small quantity generator. So just a quick way, and multiple ways to visualize over time as well as within your current month, what's going on in your site. Now I'm going to pass it back to Julia, and she will go into our next use case.
Yep, so this next scenario we're going to demo is related to spill prevention, control, and countermeasure plans, or SPCC plans, which are prepared and implemented by facilities to prevent a discharge of oil to navigable waters. These requirements are covered in 40 CFR Part 112. The SPCC rule and plan development apply if your site meets certain thresholds of oil products stored on site. So for example, you're required to develop a SPCC plan if you have more than 1,320 gallons of above ground oil storage capacity, where you're only counting oil storage containers that are greater than or equal to 55 gallons. But the rule has streamlined the SPCC plan requirements for qualified facilities, which are those that will have smaller oil storage capacities, so less than 10,000 gallons of above ground oil storage on site, and also have not had any oil spills. So for these qualified facilities, the requirements for the SPCC plan is less extensive than the full plan, and the owner operator can prepare and certify the plan, whereas facilities that are not qualified facilities must develop a full SPCC plan that meets all of the applicable requirements, and that one is reviewed and certified by a professional engineer. So some of the log data that you could track that would help you determine what type of SPCC plan you need could include something like an inventory, a routine inventory check of all of your oil tanks and containers to get that total above ground oil storage capacity. And then maybe also a spill log that documents the conditions of any spill events that you've had on site. So for example, if you were previously required to develop the full SPCC PE certified plan, but then you've now removed a 10,000 gallon tank from your site, and you go through and you check your inventory and you see that now you have maybe 4,000 gallons of oil, you might now complete and self-certify the Tier 1 SPCC plan instead of a full PE certified plan when you make your updates. Or another example, if you were previously eligible for the Tier 1 plan, but then you've had a spill where unfortunately over 1,000 gallons of oil was discharged to receiving water, you'll now need to develop a full PE certified plan. So now Amber's going to take us back into Mapistry and show us what that looks like.
Thank you. So now we will look at our next use case, and as Julie was mentioning, it's going to be our SPCC. And with SPCC, we care about two things. We care about our inventory, so like our total amount, and then we also care about spills, because both of these affect which type of plan, whether you need to submit one at all, and then obviously which type of plan you need to submit. So here we have an annual inventory. Have you guys ever run into any surprises when you go out into the field and maybe you're completing an SPCC plan and the facility's just not aware of how many, what their inventory actually is?
Yeah, I can think of at least once where we went to a site, they asked us to help them prepare their SPCC plan because they thought they needed one. But when I got there and took an inventory of all of their applicable oil sources, they actually had less than the 1,320 gallons of above ground oil storage. So the SPCC rule didn't actually apply. But we did help them put together, some standard best practices around oil handling, but there wasn't actually a need to prepare, not even a Tier 1 qualified facility SPCC plan in that case to meet the federal requirement.
Yeah, so it just goes to show how important keeping a regular inventory is. And do we know what best management practices are around this? Like, what's the best practice? How often should they be doing an inventory this on their oil?
They're going to be doing their annual H&BP updates, which is going to include oil quantities. So that would be a good time to just double check that your amount of oil on site is still consistent with your SPCC permit category.
Great. Okay, so we want to do at least annually. And then if you want to, within Mapistry, you can set this frequency to be higher than that if you want it to be quarterly or so on and so forth, just to keep up with your inventory. So we also care about our spill reporting. And then I'm just going to jump down to our charting here, because this is going to give us the real knowledge. You add all your logs in, and then here we can see, all right, well, the limit for actually reporting is going to be 1320, but we've exceeded that, so we do know that we need to submit a plan, but it's well under that 10,000 marker here. So if it's well under the 10,000, we know it might not need to be a PE certified one. But then we also care about the spills, because that ultimately determines, as Julia was mentioning, whether or not you need to have, you can have a tier 1 or tier 2, or you have to have a PE cert. So just tracking on a month-to-month basis, it looks like none of them were actually over the 1,000 gallons for each individual spill. But we do have a couple in here that were over that 42 gallon. But obviously these need to make it to navigable waters or adjoining shorelines. So we can go back into our logs here, and you can actually click into the frequency, and it's going to take you right back into that log. So if you look at the log, we're going to have all the information of where it was spilled, when it spilled, and then this is what we're looking for right here. Did it get to navigable waters or adjoining shorelines? So for March, it did, unfortunately. Let's check our February one. February, unfortunately, it did as well. So that means that it's going to jump us into a PE certified report. And then we also have our monthly trackers here. So we can see, you know, within the month, did we have any spills that were over 1,000, or did we have any that were over 42 gallons? Just a quick way to reference all of this information. Our SPCC, as I mentioned before with the grouping, we also have this inventory broken out. So we have tanks, equipment, containers, transformers. You can quickly go into each section and go through and add in your inventory. That's it for SPCC, and I'll pass it back to Julia for our final use case.
So for this final example, we're going to cover a scenario where you enter log data just once in one centralized place, and from there you're still able to get the information that you need to complete multiple environmental reports, because components of your log data might be under more than one regulation. So there could be cases where data from air emissions under a local air permit, like what's on this slide, will also be used in calculations for federal requirements, like comparing chemical releases to TRI reporting thresholds, which we'll see in the next slide. So again, one regulation could be this local air permit, where under the Clean Air Act, you have permitted sources that include things like maybe solvent usage used for cleaning, paint spray booths, coating usage, diesel generator runtime. Maybe the solvent usage rates are recorded in number of 55-gallon drums, and also in liters, and also in fluid ounces, depending on the material, because that's the easiest way for somebody out in the field to identify and log their usage of that material. And now coming back and determining the air emissions, we know that at least 7 unit conversions will need to happen, in addition to a lot of other calculations that might split up the logs into ways to get data by things like type of application, type of material, chemical components of the material, and then pollutants like PM10 VOCs. So you might need to track all of these things in gallons and in pounds as sum or averages. Compare your emissions to limits that are based on calendar periods like monthly or annually, or also on rolling periods like 12-month rolling, or in multiple instances. And that can be a lot to do already, just to get your air emissions data for your air permit. And then if we go to the next slide, we can see how some of those calculated values that were determined for your local air permit could very well be used again in calculations conducted under federal reporting requirements. So TRI, or Toxic Release Inventory Reporting, is an EPA chemical reporting program that requires certain industries, industrial facilities to report information on any TRI listed chemical that the site processes, manufactures, or otherwise uses. If these quantities exceed the corresponding TRI reporting threshold, then you're required to report on those chemicals. So the information that these facilities report, which includes data on waste management of that chemical through environmental releases, recycling, energy recovery, treatment, and disposal, is then made available to the public. The current TRI toxic chemicals list contains 770 individually listed chemicals. That includes things like benzene, formaldehyde, lead compounds, toluene, xylene, where maybe under the local air permit, we were already determining calculations with respect to a chemical like xylene, and therefore already have a portion of our calculations happening already that we would need to bring in for the xylene threshold calculation. So for TRI, information on each reportable chemical is reported using a form called Form R, or there's also a shorter form called Form A if certain criteria are met. But the EPA estimates that one Form R for one chemical might take a facility about 36 hours to complete, and Form A still over 20 hours. So we know that anything that you can do that will streamline that process and help you manage the data on a routine basis will definitely help reduce stress when coming up on the July 1st deadline. So let's see if I have control. Now we'll get into this demo, Mapistry, see what this is about. So in this example scenario, I have logs for my solvent usage. I have lead emissions from a mixing operation that we have on site, paint components used in my paint booth, and also maybe a spill log that where I record spills to surface water bodies. My local air permit has set limits and reporting requirements on my air emissions by source activity, and I report the spill events to the local water board. But I'm also aware of the federal TRI reporting requirements that could apply to me because of the 3 TRI listed chemicals that we have in our activities, which are lead, xylene, and toluene. So now here's my log for this example. I can see already that so far all of my logs have been completed, which is great. So I already know I shouldn't be missing any information for this period already, even 3 months in. If I click on one, I can see what's being logged in the field. So those are, solvents being used, lead inputs to the mixer, paint components, paint A and B, also spills to receiving water, where I also notate what receiving water that was. If I go into my log settings, I can see how everything is working together. So in my factors tab, for example, I have densities and component information, where I can see that, you know, in my paint usage, I do have xylene and toluene, and I also have xylene and toluene in my solvent usage. And unfortunately, we've had some spills of xylene, so I know that those are all kind of working together. In calculated values, I have everything that's happening to meet my air permit reporting requirements. So for example, in paint, I'm calculating how much toluene and how much xylene was emitted from my paint spray booth alone. And that I would report for my local air permit, also maybe total VOCs from my paint spray booth. And then in my thresholds calculation, since I know that I have those 3 TRI chemicals, lead, toluene, and xylene, that I'll potentially need to complete a Form R for, I do want to track how my releases of each chemical compared to the threshold throughout the year to keep tabs on them, and ideally know in advance if I'll need to set aside time to complete those reports. So under the thresholds group, I can see how I've split apart my thresholds for each chemical, and how they're all coming into play and going to be contributing to the threshold limit for the TRI chemicals. So now we do need to apply that numeric limit. So in this limits view, I can see I do have some of my air permit limits, like VOC limits on VOC emissions from my paint processing or paint spray booth, which are split apart, you know, by source. And then here I also have my TRI chemicals listed with each one of their reporting thresholds. So for lead, that's 100 pounds annually. For xylene and toluene, for example, for otherwise usage, those are each going to be 10,000 pounds annually. So back in the dashboard, we can see how we're doing so far this year.
Julie, could you show the view all logs and see how that data rolls up?
Yep. I am planning on getting to that. So if I go into view all logs, I can see kind of line by line how my log data is being split apart. So here I can just see at a glance, how am I doing with respect to my TRI reporting thresholds this year. So I can see, you know, lead is already approaching that 100 pound threshold. And that's why that's turned yellow. Xylene, it looks like I've already exceeded the threshold for otherwise usage of xylene, which is the 10,000 pounds. So I know that I'll have to complete a TRI report for xylene at the end of this year. Then when we get back into the slides, I'll also show you here we can save a bunch of different tabs with the data that we want in a way that's organized so that we know, you know, what are we pulling to apply into the specific fields of each report. What am I tracking for TRI releases versus my local air permit alone? A bunch of different ways to see this data, and this can also be downloaded. So you can save your view in any way that you want. That's going to be most helpful for you to complete any reports that you have to pull data from this log from. So back at the dashboard view, we'll see just another way to visualize this type of thing. Down here at the bottom, I can see, lead going into my mixing operation on a monthly basis. I can also see here I have my limit tracker for specific to my air permit. So I've broken it apart so that I can really identify what am I tracking and for what, under what regulations, and who am I going to be reporting this data to. So I can see, with respect to my air permit so far, I haven't exceeded any of the limits set. Again, I can see that for lead, at the end of this year, I might be reporting, completing a TRI report for lead. Toluene, again, I'm not really getting very close to that threshold, but at least if I do, then I can see it here and plan for that. And xylene here, I can see I've exceeded the otherwise use threshold for TRI reporting. So I know I should plan in advance to complete a TRI report for xylene. So not only is that helpful to track against the thresholds, but then now that I know that I will have to report for xylene, there's that view in UL logs, but I have a screenshot of it here so that we can see how it would be pulled into something like Formar. So for example, say by the end of this year, I have exceeded those emissions for lead, I've exceeded the 100 pounds. Here I would easily identify what emissions of releases of lead were due to stack emissions. And I would take this number value, which is the sum for the year, and bring that into the applicable part of Section 5 in Formar. So for xylene, very similar. I would bring in the amount released due to fugitive air emissions. I also have the spills of xylene to the creek, where I recorded my receiving water. So this is something else I can pull into Formar, and then I have that total amount that was spilled or discharged to my receiving water in the same view. So that was the last example scenario that we'll cover. I know that was a lot, but we're really only just getting started when it comes to all of the useful applications of logging and analyzing data like this. So just quickly, some of the other use cases could include things like logging data like vehicle miles traveled or generator runtime, water, power usage, and using that information to determine how you're doing compared to sustainability targets. Another could be tracking more qualitative things like safety incidents or employee training. Maybe you track your stormwater basin's inundated depth month to month to better understand flows in or losses from your basin and how that might change from season to season. Maybe also chemical inventories, which could play a part in your emissions calculations, or something like an HMBP plan in California where you take a chemical inventory and you report that. And the list goes on. So, if there's an instance where you think that your sites could use a data system like this to visualize your data, for anything, whether it was not, whether it was mentioned today. We would definitely love to learn more about it and hear from you.
Thank you so much, Julia. I know we are a couple minutes over. We did want to make sure that we have time for anyone to ask a couple questions. So now that you guys have seen how everything works, I just want to open it up for questions. So it looks like we had a couple that came in here. Does the software accommodate the Canadian Environmental Regulatory Framework? So the software is set up in a way that you can adjust your settings how you'd like. So you can set any limits that you want. So that means that there's no limitations on where they would apply to. You can kind of set up the logs in whichever way you'd like, and you can log whatever data you'd like. So there's no limitations on that type of thing. We also had another question here, or a comment maybe. It says, you might want to explain that a different Form R is completed for each reportable chemical. Yeah, can you talk about that a little bit, Julia?
Yep, so yeah, sorry if that wasn't clear, but if the chemical exceeds its own reporting threshold, which can vary by chemical, like for lead, it's 100 pounds, whereas for xylene and toluene, it's the 10,000 pounds for otherwise use. For each individual chemical, you would have to complete a Form R4 with all of the information regarding the releases of that chemical.
Great. So we do have a couple other questions, but unfortunately we are out of time. We want to be respectful of everyone's time. Thank you guys. Thank you, Julia. Thank you, Courtney, so much. It was really helpful, great informational webinar. Thank you to everyone who has joined us and has been watching, and please reach out if you have any additional questions. Have a good day.